turn to this. Anybody who's seen National Treasure, recognizes this. And question is, what is it? The Declaration of Independence, people realize, but the originals from July 1776 didn't look like this at all. They looked more like the newspaper that's in that case. The ones that were printed on July 4th were just printed. They were sent out without signature. And the last one that was on the market 10 years ago, I bid $8 million for, and I didn't get it. Norman Lear bought it, and it's been touring the country. But it's called the Dunlop Declaration of Independence, and that one was discovered behind a picture frame. So I trust that they'll check here before they sell frames. What this is a reproduction, the first edition of which was made in 1823. John Quincy Adams was then Secretary of State. His father was still alive. And after the War of 1812, there was this patriotic resurgence, and some people were making decorative prints of the Declaration. And the best one was really beautiful. It took several years to engrave, with all the state seals and a couple of engravings at the top, which John Binns, who did it, wanted to become the official edition. He made one big mistake. John Adams was the Secretary of State, who would have said, yes, we're going to make this official. But John Quincy Adams was Secretary of State, but his father's picture wasn't on it. John Hancock's was, and George Washington's was. So Adams is the one who actually ordered this to be done. And it took 3 years to make the plate. And then they printed 200 copies on vellum, which is parchment. And you can see in the book here, and you're welcome to actually look at it and touch it. There are vellum documents that are old patent documents here. They printed 200 of these. Congress actually determined where they would all go. And then later, 10 years later, Congress approved the second edition. And this is folded because it was made to be put in a book called American Archives. And until about a year ago, anytime you'd see a dealer catalog or an auction catalog describing one of these, they would describe it as 1848, which is when the book came out. We actually proved that it was printed in 1833 because we were doing the research and we found the original invoice. It was in the records of the Department of State. What happened is the book was delayed and delayed and delayed, but Peter Force, who was creating the project, knew that it was a problem. In fact, he had to go back to Congress a second time for approval. So immediately after he got congressional approval again, he went right to the printer who created the first one, hired him, they printed these, and then they were laying around for more than 10 years until they came out in the books. And I mentioned the value of the first printing. This is $30,000. It's scarce, but it's by no means the greatest rarity. The last copy of the first edition sold for a little more than $500,000. We sold, about 3 years ago, we sold a really neat one that was kind of a funny, kind of a sad story. This man was about to get married, and one of the conditions was that he had to clean out the garage. So he donated a whole bunch of stuff to a thrift shop. And somebody walks into a thrift shop and pays less than $3 for a copy of the Declaration of Independence. Now, I get calls all the time from people who think that they have one of the originals, and it turns out that their family may have had it for 50 years, but it's just one of these $3 copies. But they had one of the first editions, one of the 200. And so it sold at auction for $477,000. At the time I had a client who wanted one, but I advised not to bid on it because it was just too much publicity for that, and it actually brought more than the market price. We bought it a year later for less. So that one we called right. Right here it says the name of here's the easy points. The name of the printer, W.J. Stone. The first edition, there's a longer inscription that goes up here, plus it's on vellum. And there are all sorts of different other issues, but for instance, a couple of years ago, just a couple, somebody discovered a new printing, an anastatic press, which took an original and took ink off the original, was used to make a plate and reproduced, and from 1846. And he claimed that that was the closest to the Declaration of Independence because ink was taken off to create it. But we compared the anastatic to one of these and to one of the first editions of these and to a proof copy of the first edition of this. And you can see the progression in characters that have been worn down, or in mistakes that have crept in over time, so you can see actually, which came first. There's one, not from July, but from August of 1776, that this is based on, so everybody here signed it. Not all of them signed it in August of 76. McCain was the last one who signed it a year later. But some people who voted for it weren't there in Congress the next month to sign it. And some people who signed it had not been there to vote for it. In the next year, 1777, was the first time the names of the signers were actually released. One other fun story that we get into from Declaration of Independence, we were researching one of the July 76 printings. And in doing so, we noticed changes in the text and the style. And the long story short is that we think that there were two originals from July 4th of 1776 that went to two separate printers. Each of those would be the most valuable document in history, and neither of those have been seen since. And the reason that we think it's two is that the official printer really followed John Adams's style, who had copied from Jefferson and was part of the same committee, whereas the other edition really followed Jefferson's style. And it's the kind of thing, scholars and historians really hadn't noticed that before, but when we were in the process of authenticating one of these July 76 editions, that's what we found. One thing that's really neat, in the National Archives, they have the plate that was used to create these, and you can see on top where the first edition imprint should be, it's rubbed out, and it is put in at the bottom. So there's still things we don't know about how many intermediate printings there were and how many plates there were, but we know that there was only one plate for the first edition.